You guys can be seated.
You know, Neil McDonough is a popular actor in Hollywood. I mean, if you've seen him, he's got a very unique look about him. And after years of paying his dues and working, he had actually scored a major role on a TV show in the early 2000s, kind of mid-2000s or something back in there. Here's the problem, though. Long ago, it's not a problem, it's a great thing. But he had become a Christ follower, and he was married, and he had made a commitment to his wife. I'm not going to do any racy scenes or sex scenes or intimate scenes with another actress out of respect for you and respect for Jesus. And he told him that up front when he got on the show. And then the show took off, and it was doing really well. And it was fighting for ratings. And the producers got to the point where they decided, and the director said, look, we're fighting for ratings. We need to race this up a little bit, get this a little racier. So what I need you to do is I need you to do this sex scene with one of your co-stars. And he thought about it, and he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I told you I wouldn't do that. He made that decision because of the honor and commitment he had to his wife and the commitment he had to God, and he got fired from a very popular show that he was a main lead in. And he got recast. And I heard him talk about it. He said, he said immediately afterward, it was hard. But he said, I wasn't working. And because of that stand that I took, there weren't job opportunities just lining up for me. And in fact, any that were kind of drying up. And I lost my house. My wife and I lost our house in L.A. I was driving a Mercedes at that point. I lost my Mercedes. I lost that. I mean, my career seemed to be going into the toilet. Now, he's continued working since then. I mean, you have actually seen him in a lot of things, but he was in some Marvel movies and stuff like that. You've seen him in projects like, he's a popular voice for superhero cartoons. Actually, he's in Yellowstone right now. Actually, he has a role in there. But he didn't know at the point if he'd even have a job. And for a while, immediately afterwards, he didn't. But he understood that my boss and my career, my main career, has a higher boss than who I immediately answer to. And that caused him to make a choice. Now, to some people, it would look like it would distort his career, but not for him. When we talk about this concept, we're talking about this series, Jesus is Enough, and the difficulty really for accepting that statement. Because everything in the world tells us that that's not true. We've got to have all these extra things in our lives to make our life what it needs to be. And the hard part is the acceptance of that statement. But the truth is, the acceptance of that is really the foundation for success in everything we do as Christ followers. Everything we do as human beings. It's the understanding and trust in that statement that allows us to trust Jesus in our daily activities, with our daily decisions, moment by moment. It helps us to fear God, to act on biblical promises and principles, and to walk by the Spirit. I mean, you have to trust that Jesus is enough when the Holy Spirit leads you to do something that's absolutely biblical but totally not secular worldly. We're looking at a few areas in this series, and we talked about that are hard to trust God, the places that we feel like really kind of totally depend on us And so often these areas that we've been talking about, we take charge. There's a lot of pre-made justification to which we can, take charge, and we grab the reins, of evaluation and decision making. And these are some of the places that we're looking at in this series that it's really hard to just submit to God to and trust He really is enough. Last week we talked about marriage. We talked about how it's an exercise in submission for every person in the marriage, and how how all of our submission is boundaried by the limit of our reverence to Christ. And while we also saw that following Jesus gives us the standard and the strength to be successful in our marriages. Now this week we're going to look at something a little bit different. Another area where it's hard to give full control to Christ to, and Him in this arena, this area is our career. In our culture, a career is given so much weight as to the worth of a person. It's one of those questions that people always seem to get around to when you meet them. Like, what do you do for a living? So what do you do? I do it. It's just kind of a habit. Your career, your job, it dominates so much of your life when you think about it. We spend the vast majority of our lives in school for the first 18 years, and one of the biggest outcomes of that is preparing ourselves for our career and to function in society. Everyone has to get a job that seems to have a good enough money to survive. After elementary and middle and high school, colleges are chosen often for how you can be trained for a career, the program that you have. Is it a good one? Will they let me in? Can I get a good job out of there? How's their placement services? All of that. You got to get to the ones with a good reputation. Got to get to the right program, the right faculty connections. And it affects your vocabulary when you think about it and how you see life. Engineers, you can tell an engineer pretty quick because they talk about life in a certain way sometimes. You just know they're kind of like this right here. And you can tell the creative artists because they're just, and you see that. You can tell how people are about what they do and the way they talk. And in the most formative years of your life on the way to adulthood, even then, you have an eye on your career, and that's shaping you. Then we get into the workplace, and it keeps going. There's pressure to meet standards of people that we have no say in. A lot of times you have bosses, and you have people that are higher up than you, and they set goals. And for you to work at that job, you have to try to meet these goals, and that's your performance matters. Our coworkers, our bosses, makes it hard because some of them might not share our Christian ideals or Christian values. Some businesses operate on practices that are not ethical, much less God-honoring, and sometimes it's even more complex because a business might be fine in itself, but within the work, there's actually pressures to meet standards, goals, and marks that will cause you to feel the temptation to put the lordship of Christ kind of on the back burner. Sometimes just for a moment, here and there. And in those moments, that is where we feel this question, where we verbalize it, and whether we verbalize it in this way or not, is Jesus really enough for my career? I'm going to tell you that He is, obviously. You know my stance on that, but I want us to look at this concept of work and what it's for, and how it's not a conflict with God, not at conflict with God, no matter how much we think it is. But it was created by God, it's commanded by God, and to do exactly what Jesus was doing, to make disciples. First thing I'm going to say, where did work come from? Anybody got any idea? I just said it. Let's figure it out. Work came from God created it. God created work. This is all baked in. Do you realize this is baked into the design of human beings? I'm not really sure how often we realize that. It seems like it's, so often people, I think they seem like it's a necessary evil that I just have to go do and get over with. But you realize it's not meant to be evil at all. See, God made people in such a way that we have to be active. People who don't even have a job, you'll find something. You'll find a video game on your phone and you'll try to excel at it. You'll try to do something else. You'll put a puzzle together. If you're not doing anything else, you get bored. You get bored because I'm not doing something that is engaging me, and I need to be engaged and active and doing things. People we're meant to be active not only mentally but also physically. That we see that with our bodies and our minds. When we're not active, our minds and bodies begin to degrade further. And we lose the capability to do things at our peak performance. What's that famous phrase? If you don't use it, you'll lose it. And that's because if you don't do something with what you have, you'll lose the ability to do it. One of the first things that God did, we see this, after He created man, was to give him a job. Do you realize that? In Genesis 1:27, God created human beings, male and female, and the first thing he did was to give them a job or a task to work toward. In Genesis 1:28, actually, it says, then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground. There's the first job description that you have ever seen, right there. There's your punch list. There's your stuff right there. That's what what God called people to do. We were made to have tasks to accomplish. That's a part of what we are. You know, if you're frustrated, you don't have enough to do, or you're bored, I mean, that's normal. God made you that way. If we don't have enough to do, we get bored. He made us this way. This is baked into who we are. We were even made to have authority over things, to handle it responsibly, to have goals and to do things and lead others to do that as well. God also planted the garden. When God planted the Garden of Eden, he actually gave man a position. He said in Genesis 2:15, it says, the Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it. He's the garden tender. I mean, he's the gardener. That was his job. You're the overseer. He was a manager of the garden. And see, human beings were made to express leadership, to have purpose. Adam was supposed to name all the animals and watch over the garden, be responsible for it. Did you know that originally work wasn't really supposed to be hard? I know we see that. Right? We go to work. Oh, it's Monday. Thank God it's Friday. We have all these things, and that's all based around the work week, right? We got to go in and deal with all those people we got to deal with again. We got to go in and work with all those people that aren't paying attention, that don't want to do their job, that want to do our job for us and not let us do our job. We got all this type of thing, right? You have them their business, they don't want to do their job, they want to do my job and tell me how to do it. That's how they want to do it, right? You know, we deal with all of this stuff. But originally, work was not supposed to be hard. Some people will tell you that work became because of the fall of man, because of sin, because of the curse that followed when Adam and Eve sinned. But that's not true. Work was always a part of the original plan. It happened prior to the fall that he gave these jobs. It became hard and painful after the fall, Genesis 3. Sometimes he said, and to the man, this is God said, since you listen to your wife, all right, guys, look, that is not, you can't, now you don't have biblical justification not to listen to your wife. That's not what we're talking about. So since you listened to your wife and ate from the tree, since you listened to your wife and did something I told you not to do, since you put your wife over me, goes back to marriage last week, remember? Since you listened to your wife and ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. In other words, your workplace is going to be a problem. All your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. Verse 18, it will grow thorns and thistles for you. There'll be barriers. There'll be annoying people. There'll be sandpaper people. There'll be problems. There'll be shortages. There'll be work stuff. Though you will eat of its grains. This is what's going to use to give to you. Verse 19, by the sweat of your brow will you have food to eat until you return to the ground from which you were made. It's made to you to help be a part of God's provision. For you were made from dust, and to dust you will return. So work became hard. It became to be a thing. I've told my kids this several times, but you're going to want to do something, because I have kids that are working in the career thing. They're heading toward what they want to do and thinking about what they're going to do. You want to find something you like, but I guarantee you probably something in what you like will be something that you don't like in relation to other things in that job. And no matter where you are, there's going to be something that you don't appreciate as much as something else. And you would rather get away with, you'd rather not do, you'd rather not have to do. And that's part of work, is actually being able, and I tell my kids a lot, I said, if you can do something you don't like to the very best of your ability, that's an incredible skill to have, because I guarantee you're going to run into that somewhere. And often, if you're able to do what you don't like to the best of your ability, you'll get to do what you do like to the best of your ability as well. And I think, so work becomes hard. But work is a powerful motivator in our lives because it's baked into who we are from the very beginning of creation. It has a powerful place in our lives. And because of that, there's some dangerous responses that we could have to work. And I'm going to give you 3 of those that you have to watch out for. There's 3 dangerous responses to work. One, you might worship it. It's so important to you. It might be, this happens all the time to people you see who become workaholics. I find all of everything that I do, everything's about the job. I got to get to the work. I'm going to go there late at night and be there early in the morning. Stuff like that. I've been through places in my life. I remember, one time, and you have seasons where you're busier than others, but I mean, there's times you have to think about, what am I doing? I remember one of those times, my wife, I believe it was your birthday, you were at a teacher's conference or something, and I just changed jobs. I was working in technical ministries. I'd become the communications pastor at a rather large church, and they were doing some video stuff, and I was sitting there at 2:30, it was Valentine's Day or your birthday one? I can't remember. You were traveling, and I found myself at the church working on video frame rates at 2:30 in the morning. And I'm sitting there going, why am I doing this? I know I like this stuff, but come on. This is a little crazy. A little over. I can work on this later. It doesn't have to be, 59.94 is so much better than 29 point. Okay. That's when you got to move on, okay? So at some point, you can worship. This happens when we overestimate what work can provide. And we can try to gain from it things that it will never provide correctly. Self-worth, achievement, happiness, all those stuff don't come from work. They don't come from work. Two, the second thing is we might reject it. Let's face it, work is hard. It can be draining. Some jobs really don't offer immediate outcomes that we like, and even long-term positive ones, it seems at times. God can put us in a place where we're like, boy, that's a really tough job. I don't really like it. And it can seem like it's just for the money, or does it have enough money, and the headaches that we bring home can be so frustrating to us. This happens when we underestimate what work is for. When work just becomes a chore, we're underestimating work. When we worship, we overestimate it, and we can also twist it. This happens when we don't understand what work is for, really. We misunderstand this. We misunderstand work. We know what's important, we know what's necessary, but we don't understand what God is meaning to accomplish with it in our lives. And a lot of times what we'll see is work is over here and being a Christian's everywhere else. And we separate it. We'll go as far as we can in work, feel like it's just another thing, and never really link it to what God intended it to be. And we'll miss out on a pile of blessing, even in the biggest crap jobs you've ever worked. There are things that God is doing in those places because you are there that will be incredibly valuable and you need to take in. We'll do things that are necessary to succeed. Sometimes when we're misunderstanding work, when we're twisting it, and we'll just wash our hands and go home and just try to forget about it. And granted, there are some things at work you want to leave there. Don't get me wrong. But there's valuable lessons that God is doing while you're there to change who you are and help you to grow. So why did God create work? That's a big point. That's a big, important thing. To provide for us? Not really. Matthew 6 tells us that God is the provider for us. Ultimately, that's him. To gain worth and validation? No. Psalm 139 tells us that God planned out our days, and our worth comes from the care with which God made us. The verse we just read in Genesis tells us that we were made in God's image, and that he judged us as good as a part of that creation. And when 1 Peter 2:9 tells us that we are God's very own special possession. See, God gave us our worth by sending his son Jesus to die for us, to making us in his image. All of these things are worth statements from God, also showing how gracious and wonderful he is and giving us pictures into parts of his character. So why did God create work? Same reason he created everything else, to reveal himself through it to us and to everything. See, God created work to make disciples and to help us know who he is. Do you realize that the first thing that we see God doing in the Bible really is work? He created the world. We see him having a responsibility and a goal and overseeing things and having authority and managing things and making things and giving them responsibility. We all see all this as a part of the character of God. For us to truly understand them and him, he made this as a part of who we are, because this is a part of who he is. And it's important for us to understand that. Think about this. What makes the world difficult? It's really sin. That's what makes work difficult. That's what makes the world difficult. Everybody's got a theory, but just like sin makes your work hard, it does the same thing to everything else. You know, every hurt, every pain, every time something ended, every lost dream, every sad story, somewhere was because of the effect of sin in our world. So the God who made a world perfect sent his perfect Son to rescue us and give us a way to handle the world we unfortunately chose. Now, work brings stress and pressure from wages to the work of it to the instability to coworkers. But here's the thing. Jesus really is enough for your career, for your job, from where you go, where you spend your time. Here's why. Here's a few reasons that we need to understand why Jesus is enough. I'm going to tell you this. Every Christian has the same career. Do you realize that? Every Christ follower works for the same corporation. I don't care where you go to work or who pays your check or what shirt you wear, what logo you are, where you do. If you work at one place and it's competition with this other Christ followers place, you guys are all working for the same thing. Psalm 24:1 tells us that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Everything is God's. The entire world exists for the reason of revealing God to people, God revealing himself. Jesus came to make himself known to others, to die on a cross and reconcile all of us to himself. In Luke 19, Jesus stated that his job, his reason, his purpose statement said in 19:10 says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save those who are lost." Then before he left, he gave us an overall mission of everything that we do that encompasses all of the tasks that he gives us. He said in Matthew 28:19 and 20, he says, "Therefore go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching these new disciples to obey all the commands I've given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." So the career of every Christian, that's not just for pastors, that's just not just for your Sunday school teachers or leaders in church, that is for everyone. So the career of every Christian is being a disciple maker. And we are to know God and make him known to other people, and everything that we do springs from that one mission. You know, I've said before that many people see themselves as engineers or teachers or plumbers or salesmen that happen to be Christians. Right? I'm a plumber, but I go to church on the weekend. But in truth, we are Christians that happen to be teachers or engineers or plumbers or mechanics or waiters or clerks or students or whatever, because we have the same boss. That's the second thing. Every Christian shares the same boss. You might say, my boss doesn't look like God. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they don't. They may not sometimes. Sometimes they might seem like they are, might feel like they think they are, but we don't. We have a boss, and it's not the person that just sits in front of us. That's our manager. Just like I don't own anything, I'm a steward of the things that God has put in my possession. Your boss, your authority, your manager, the person you answer to, that's not your ultimate boss. No matter who writes your paycheck, we all have the same boss that provides of us. Paul wrote about this in Colossians 3. He said, "Work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people." You know, whatever you do, you're working for the Lord rather than people. When you drive, when you volunteer, when you cook, when you study, when you play an instrument, you're working for God. 1 Corinthians 10:31 states something very similar. It says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God." So let's take the whatever you do. That's pretty broad. So whether you eat or drink or whether you lead people in that project to build that specific something that I don't know what it is over at Harris. Whether you eat or drink or whether you stop a speeder to give him a ticket. Whether you eat or drink, or you're teaching that classroom of unruly kids who you really want to string up, sometimes and just put in a closet or something. Whether you eat or drink, or whether you stand at a cash register and you punch in things with a smile, even when somebody has to go back and get a price check 55 times. Whether you eat or drink or whatever it is that you do it all for the glory of God, so that God is glorified through what you do. And that tells us that not only do we share the same career, we have the same boss, but what that does for us really is it makes that every Christian shares the same goal ultimately. It says everything, our goal is for everything we do to demonstrate the glory of God to the world around us. Everything we do is to be evidence that God exists in the world. I want you to think about it. He made us in his image, Genesis 1. That's not just looking like him, but to exhibit the characteristics of who he is. In Ephesians 2:10, Paul wrote that, for we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. You know, we are to do good things that he has planned for us. In fact, Psalm 139 tells us this in verse 16. It says, you saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. So the God of the universe has planned out your story that you're going to have. The truth is that God has done this for every person who's ever lived. The truth is that you are different from every other person that has ever lived. No one has ever occupied your space. No one ever else has had the same combination of moments in your life. You had your mix of experiences, your mix of talents, your mix of cultures, of locations, of where you've lived. No one else has ever lived in the time frame that you have and occupied where you are. And because of that, while we all have the same, every Christian has a unique role in how we do things. See, all the aspects of your life combine to a specific role that God created just for you and you alone to fill. 2 Timothy 1:9 says, for God saved us and called us to live a holy life. He did this not because we deserved it, but because that was his plan from before the beginning of time. So his plan is that you and I are very different. We have equal and important ministries and areas that God has created us to do. It's all a part of God's larger plan. You know, when I went to college, I drove my parents crazy. Because I went there and I was like, okay, I don't really know what I want to do because I could do a lot of things. I was kind of a jack of all trades. I could do a lot of things sort of well. You know, I could do the music stuff, or I could do math, or I could do writing, or I could do this, or I could do that. You know, there were certain things that I could do well. So I just kind of dabbled around a little bit. First, I started off as a math major, you know, and then I decided I got to Cal 3, and that didn't work for me anymore because that was just too much, and that was not what I want to be. So then I changed over to computer science, I think, for a couple of quarters. And you know what? That coding, oh man, I love computer science. I get it, but you know what? Just staring at that code, like thousands of lines of code, and finding one little period that's not in the right place, no, that's not for me. And so then I changed over and said, I'm going to be a performance major in piano keyboards. I can play keyboard. That's great. I'll do that. I got there, and I was there for like 2 quarters, and it was like, okay, this isn't worth the paper it's written on, you know, and I've already missed a lot of time, so I ended up going over to transferring over into business. And I got my major. I got a major in business administration and marketing with minors in computer science and math and a whole pile of hours in music. That was me. And my parents were like, oh my word. My dad, but see, it was a special place because my dad grew up in the Depression. And he had to work just to buy things for himself to get through high school, so he didn't go to college. And his dream was for me to go to college. And you know where that was born for me to take all those different things and keep going for different stuff? Is my father sitting there telling me, son, you're never going to get another chance. You better take it. Try it. You never know. And so that's where he built me. And what I thought, and I've explained that over time, as I went to seminary, and I'm like, then I ended up going into ministry. And I'm like, man, did I waste all this time? No, I haven't. Everything that I have learned in education, from the business to the marketing to the computer science, because I didn't know that there were going to be web pages and stuff like that, and then web pages came out, and I needed to do that, and I needed that for some of the churches that I work for and for different things. I've done it for different stuff here and there. I needed to know a little bit of the coding, so that helped the coding, the marketing. I know how to do that, I know how to sell things. The music, okay, that works with church, you know, working out how to do, you may say, this is crazy, but just doing drama and different things like that, knowing how to set up a stage and what makes something balanced and what doesn't, and all of those type of things. All of those things have come together. I've used every management, sales, you know, all of that, HR, accounting, all of that type of thing has been a part of my journey in the career that I am. What I call that is God's personal training plan that I had no idea was happening as it was going on. And I had no picture of, well, you didn't get the list of that. God didn't hand me a list at the beginning of my college career and said, you need to take these classes from here and these classes from here and these classes from here. It just kind of went that way. And God took me from place to place to place to place, and I just tried to follow him and do that. For some people, God gives them a plan. Here's your plan. For me, it was not that way. When I accepted the call into ministry at 15, I said, God, I want to be anything but a pastor. You know, and at the time, I really, and it wasn't just a rejection of that particular role. I wanted to be obedient to God if he wanted to, but I just didn't feel like he was making me that. And all the jobs that I did up until this job was very different. Just every job that I went, every church that I went to, I was the first one that they had in that role. And I got to create it. And so, I mean, I was a communications pastor one place. I was young adults. I never had a full-time ministry young adults at that particular church. I never had a communications pastor. After I left the church I was a communications pastor at, my worship leader called me 2 years later. And I mean, because I did everything there. I mean, I wrote music. I created our website. You know, I did our social media policy. I did our inter-office email policy. I worked with our technical ministries. I did our marketing campaigns. I had graphic artists under me, and I had videographers under me, teams, and we planned things and shot stuff, and I told stories, and I preached, and all this stuff. I wrote music, everything. But 2 years after I left, Eric Phillips, who was my worship leader, called me, and he said, hey, I finally got Russ to admit it. He had no idea what you were doing. He didn't know what he wanted from you. He just wanted you to do everything. And that's what he did. He finally did, because we never could figure out, what am I? I'm communications pastor. Everybody go, what is that? And I just don't know. I do everything. You know, and these were all my roles. But God plans it, and God will do that for you, because what I want you to understand, God has a personal training plan for you that no one else can have or can accomplish. Your job, your school, your family, your social status, your hobbies, your talents, your location, your education, your lack of education, your influence, your career, your hardships, your failures, your successes, your hurts, your pains, all of those come into something that God has created, that you are special, and no one else can be what you are and will ever be what you are. And all of that fits under God's plan for what God is trying to accomplish in the world. And your career is a part of that. God put all that together in a specific timeline, coordinated with all the people you have ever been in contact with in your life, all the events of history that have happened while you are alive, to create the person that you are, this specifically targeted, specialized disciple maker. And that was your position. So your position description was written by God. And you're still finding out what it is. And you will be all up to the time that you die. Your specific assignment is something that no one else has. And it was created by the God of the universe. So God, as your boss, has you to fulfill his mission here. You have a part in that. God sets up all the projects you are to do before you were ever, he set them up all before you were born. He promised to provide everything that you ever need to be successful in the ways that he wanted you to be. And even when you experience inevitable loss and failure, and you will, he still works for your good, and his good ends. You know, I had a friend that was a teacher. And it was interesting because, you know, he's kind of a teacher, but he has an engineer bent, and he's a musician and all these things. He's kind of a catch-all everything like that. But he always talked about the rubric. Oh, the rubric that I'm going to be evaluated by. I need to know the rubric. I need to know the rubric. And that simply meant, in straight form, that was what was the criteria for the evaluation that he would get from his superior. And what he wanted to know, maybe you've run into this. You know this term maybe more than me. You know, he wanted to know this all the time because he wanted to make sure that the job he was doing was the job that his superiors wanted, so that when he was evaluated, he would get a positive evaluation, which would ensure his job stability and hopefully get him a raise. And that's the most important reason that Jesus is enough for your career. Because Jesus will write your final and only personnel evaluation. Over the whole of your life, Jesus is going to write it. In Matthew 16, Jesus tells his disciples this. He's speaking in verse 31. He says, but when the Son of Man comes in all his glory, this is later on, right? And all the angels with him, Then he will sit upon his glorious throne, verse 32. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep, those who have done, and the goats, those who have not. Verse 33. It says, he will place all the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. And verse 34, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. And then verse 40, and he gives a rubric there. And he goes to number 41. He says, then the king will turn to those on his left and say, away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. And Jim, why'd you skip the rubric? Because if I stayed there, we'd be here in an hour. I'm not doing that to you. I just want to set up the point to you that Jesus is enough because Jesus is the boss and because Jesus determines what is enough of you and me. I don't. Jesus does. And at the end of the day, here's the thing. The only person I have to please is Jesus. No matter the job, the performance, the pay grade, the title, the pension, the retirement, the benefit package, the notoriety or lack of it, I can be eternally successful because there's only one evaluation that will matter. And when I realize that Jesus is first and Jesus is enough, I am on my way to immediate success and eternal success. In the moment, in a year, in my 5-year plan, in a 10-year plan, and when I go to be with him in glory. You know, it's funny how God works things, you know, because this past week, I'm taking Matt. We're going through, he's up there working, he's on slides, but we're going through the purpose-driven life. And I encourage you to go through that. It's amazing how God works this stuff out because this sermon was planned for this date way back. But you know, it just worked out this way that I'm going through the purpose-driven life this week. And what it talked about was your shape and accepting who you are and all of this stuff that I'm talking to you about today. It's a lot different. It's a different bent from where I was going with the sermon, but it's very much a great companion piece. I ask you to go and take a look at that. But accepting who God made you to be and being the unique person that God created you to be and expressing God in that way. Because here's the thing. There's not any of us that are exactly like God. I can't. If you live with me 24/7, you would not know. And you look at me, I want Jim to be the example of God. That's a fail because I'm only a failed, pale, pathetic, blurred out, nasty photo of what God really is. But here's the crazy thing. God makes billions of people and has a plan for all of them. And he wants you to, when you follow him, he wants you to be a part of that picture. It's almost like those pictures you have where you zoom in on somebody really, or there's somebody, you zoom on somebody really close. It's like a picture of a person and they zoom out. And you notice at the end of it, it's a big picture of something else. That's kind of what we are with Christ. To communicate that to each other and to ourselves. And here's the thing, you look at Neil McDonough, you want to talk about that career that he had. I mean, one of the crazy parts about that is you would think that ended his career, but it really, really didn't. I'm going to tell you that his ability to stand up for Christ in what he did expanded, and it defined what his career was supposed to be. Because of that, he lost out on jobs that he would have had, but he gained other jobs. He's been able to speak at events on this that he probably wouldn't have had. It opened up a whole new audience, and probably I wouldn't even know his name. I know he's just that white-haired dude and like walking tall that was the mean guy. I would just know that. I wouldn't know what was in the back of who he was. From that, he's gained more roles. He's continued to work, but he's also worked in faith-based movies where he's been able to talk about the gospel, and that's opened up doors there. He even started his own faith-based production company where they produce faith-based movies to teach things about the gospel and about Jesus and about scriptural principles and biblical stuff. And even beyond that, he's been able to speak at events, like I said, talking about it and give his testimony. But here's the crazy thing. Now, when he does an interview, inevitably, somebody's going to ask him when he was on Scoundrels and that time he got fired and why. And what does he get to do? He gets to talk about Jesus and talk about why I did it and the commitment to my wife and the commitment to my Lord. God defined it and expanded it. And if we don't follow Christ in the things that we do, if we don't understand that our boss is God, we will limit the scope of what God intended for us to be, or we just will ignore it and be away from it. Don't do that. See, in the end, Jesus has the training, the gifting, and the design that he's made for our lives. He's made a very specific story and role for you that no one else can do or fill. And there's no way God called you to spend 30 or 40% of your life in study and in the hours at work on a regular basis to devote years of training to something that has nothing to do with his plan for this world. Your job is integral into what God wants to do to make disciples. You know, I don't know what. In fact, it's more likely that God has trained you and is training you to do the very things that you're doing according to his mission. But you need to think about it. How is your work furthering the mission of God? Do you go there with that intent? Do you say, I'm going to work today so that I can learn more about God and I can grow myself? Or do you go to work, I just can't wait till I get off so that I can learn about God? Or do you just wait, I can't wait till I get off so I can just watch something on Netflix and play video games? I don't know, that may be how you are. But God is not into wasting time. Think about it. Are you broadening the field to share the gospel with at your work? Are you his example in that chosen area? Are you possibly the only example in your sphere of influence? Or are there hidden examples that need someone to stand out so that they will be more bold to share the things that God has for them? Does your performance at work reflect the gospel and the qualities of God because you're working for God? Do you work at that job like you're going to present it to the Lord as your offering at the end of the day? You go back to Cain and Abel, go read that story about how the offering went. I present my best, and I'll give you something. Didn't go well. Watch that story. You know, it said, how are you using your direct talents, honestly, at the local church to further the ministry here? God's got you here for a reason. There's things that you do and things that you know how to do and special skills that you have, events and experiences that you have, that God has put you here specifically to do that. What talents, experiences, abilities, and training do you have that are untapped because you're either afraid to use it or either you think you won't have the time or you won't be successful, whatever. Here's what I want you to do this week. This is your action step this week. I want you to spend some time alone with God. Find a place in your schedule. And I want you to specifically ask those questions. God, what am I doing to further you? Do you have something that I should be doing that I'm not? How should I be using the talents that you've given me? Am I burying them in the backyard of a corporation that will not know my name in 50 years? Instead of using them for a God that died for me. And what does that say about me if I am? Analyze prayerfully your career motivation and be honest. Are you truly consulting God in your career decisions? I mean, this one, and I'm going to be honest with you, this will not end up with everyone quitting their jobs and going into full-time vocational ministry. I don't think that's the way it's going to work, all right? You know, so don't be like, oh, you want me to quit my job. I'm not saying that. I'm saying go evaluate where you are with it. And it won't likely mean that everyone just quits their job and starts over. You know, I'm going out into the world and start a brand new job. Doesn't mean that's going to happen. I mean, it won't, but I doubt it will for the vast majority of people. But what it will most likely mean is that we reassess our motivations and our choices and stay where we are with a new purpose, a more unified goal for the whole of our lives. We see where we are in our job as a mission field that I both grow and I help others grow as well. And it will result in a life that has more confidence, more peace, and more stability in everything we do. Let's pray. God, we thank you that you are the great combiner. You are the great organizer. You are the awesome administrator. God, you have all the skills that you have ever given to anyone. And as good as anyone can be, you are greater in each and every one of those things. God, we thank you that you are that way. We thank you that you are the lovely and amazing God that plans so well, that creates so well. You're both the creative and the engineer. You are an everything in between. And you are all of those perfectly. So Lord, help us to be the examples that you called us to be. Accept who we are. Be proud of what you have given us. Be thankful to the God that made us and emulate him in every way we can, especially at our careers. God, let us never forget that our boss is a manager and we follow the boss. Our boss temporarily is that, but our true boss is you. So, Lord, help us to follow you in everything that we do. God, in your name we pray. Amen.
Wonderful message. We're so grateful that you spent the day with us today. And we hope if you're visiting, we hope that you'll come back and visit us again, because we like to adopt people like right off the bat and make them family. So you're family if you're here today, and we love you. If you are feeling led to give, there is, you can give online at baywestchurch.com/give. You can text 84321, or there's a drop box back there where Joe is, and right back there, and you can slide it in there too. But again, thank you so much, and we just pray that you have an awesome week this week.
All right, you guys can stand up and join us in this last song. All right, let's sing this out. You call my name, and I ran out like rain. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. You call my name, and I ran out like rain. Out of the darkness into your glorious day. All right, we'll see you guys next week, Bay West. God bless.
I've been trying to fight